So, good evening. Thank you very much for being here. It's really wonderful that we have Zhu Pei with us here. I think that many of you know the situation in China much better than I do. And it's very interesting that, given the incredible rate of urbanization and development, in a way, there have been so few architects from China who are really at the forefront of doing significant projects. I know there are a lot of people in this room who hopefully in the next 5 or 10 years will have lots of opportunities and will do great things in China. But it's amazing that there's really a handful of people who are doing significant work, and then there are lots of people, including again some of the people here in this room, who are traveling from the West to make projects in China. And I think Zhu Pei is one of the very few people who's doing really exceptional work. He has also been one of the few architects who's really combined in a very interesting way his experience of studying and working in the West, in the United States, at the same time as using his experience from China. He studied at Tsinghua and then at Berkeley and founded his studio now almost 10 years ago. So this actually would be the 10th anniversary of the studio. And as you probably know from some of the material that's been published, he was named as one of the 5 greatest architects under 50. Zhu Pei, are you still under 50? Or? Okay. By the Huffington Post in 2011, and won the Courvoisier Design Award from Wallpaper, many other awards, Design Vanguard, the award from Architectural Record, and special prizes from UIA and from UNESCO. So I think it's true and that his work has been really recognized internationally. He is also very unusual in the sense that there has been a lot of focus in his practice on cultural buildings and especially museums, and the connection then has focused a great deal on the interrelationship between architecture and art. He was commissioned by Guggenheim Foundation to design the Guggenheim Art Pavilion in Abu Dhabi, the Guggenheim Museum in Beijing, and his work he includes the Chai Guojiang Courtyard House renovation in Beijing, the Digital Museum, Olympic Control Center in Beijing, OCT Design Museum, and he's now working on almost like a half a dozen or more museum or art buildings, including a Dali Contemporary Art Museum, Minsheng Contemporary Art Museum in Beijing, the Taimiao Art Museum in Beijing, Art Museum of Wuhan University, Himalaya Culture Center in Tibet, and the Performance Center in Dali. And of course, his work has been also exhibited throughout the world, especially at the Venice Biennale, at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, at the Centre Pompidou in Paris. And on top of that, I was lucky to spend some time with him on the Mies van der Rohe Awards in 2011. And he has, of course, also continued his academic involvement by teaching at Tsinghua and more recently also at Columbia, where he taught a studio. So please welcome Zhu Pei. Thank you.
Thanks, Mosen. Kind of an introduction. Actually, I hesitated to give the lecture, especially today, where unusual day is for Boston, like California. I encourage everybody to go out rather than stay in the, this dark lecture room. Thanks, Mosen, for inviting me to give a lecture at GSD. I'm very honored to have a chance to share my work, my experience, and my thought with everybody. But my talk today is, I have to make the clock start. Le Kong, inspiration from nature and the tradition. So actually, this topic is generated by a question that has interested to me for a long time. Why the Chinese architects always try to create Chinese identity in terms of the image, architecture image, instead of critical contemporary solution. The Chinese, not for my generation, actually previous generation too, they have the huge, the mental load to basically stop the Chinese architects, like in terms of invention, creation, and also kind of like us far away from the fundamental of the architecture. So whenever some people see, okay, this is very Chinese, so that seems to me as kind of a traditional Chinese. Maybe I encourage everybody just close your eyes for a few seconds to think about what is architecture, what is Chinese architecture. Probably those images in your mind is traditional architecture. The question is here, actually, I really want to explore is, can we get inspiration from tradition, like even Chinese philosophy, without losing the contemporary critical thinking? That's probably I really try to talk tonight. If I translate, definitely this is a very special word, right? Le Kong is into the English, that means emptiness and nothingness. But Chinese Kong means both nothing and everything. The Kong is one of the most important Chinese philosophy from Taoism, start early of Chinese civilization. Also gave big influence about Confucianism, which is major Chinese culture, right? Also, they combine with Buddhism later on. So Kong probably, the writer mentioned a few words about actually talking about space. I'm not sure that totally translator is right. Actually, Kong means not only the empty or space, they're talking about attitude, talking about modest, talking about respect, talking about less effort, take it easy, and then you have some such as balance. So this so before we go to further explain the meaning of the Kong, I would like to start the few projects first in order to give you a very general sense about how I can, at least how I can translate sort of a Chinese idea into the contemporary architecture. This performance art center in Dali, I'm working with very interesting Chinese performance artist, Yang Liping, who spent most of her life to rediscover the local primitive dancing, represent over 20 nations in Yunnan. It's that this performance is really pragmatic, pretty much like really local. Even the performance, not professional from the local people. The performance center located in the valley. Dali is surrounded by the huge mountain. If you found this satellite photo, huge mountain on the west, huge lake, local people call ocean. Our project site just a little bit right up from the medieval town. Pretty much nature dominate, really primitive. Big lake, the mountain, the city, really small. And not only the nature dominates, but also they have really peaceful, kind of very easy the country lifestyle. So this is a two clue going to be generate our the design. So the concept we want to achieve here, first of all, we want to bring the show from the inside of the black box, which is a traditional theater, to the outdoor space. Secondly, we want to break up the boundary between the performance and the audience. And also we try to break up the landscape architecture, etc. So definitely our form is kind of inspired by the those nature. So you always see a lot of the beautiful mountain, lake, wetland landscape. It's really hard to get in single straight line except when mountain and the water meet. That's horizon line, right? So even their building just so small scale and never have the straight line. So this kind of things start to generate our design. Definitely it's not the big ideas. From this diagram, you can clear know what we really want to achieve. The theater only part of this program. So for the normal design, since this is a theater, right? Normally people just major building except the lobby, everything is theater. But we leave the maybe 60%, even more, providing the outdoor space, amphitheater, plaza. This is a Kung's idea. We give the flexibility, we give the space, which is sounds like nothing, but they turn to very important role for this architecture. We also go back very primitive the typology like transparent space, like nest or cave definitely for the performance space. We also create a very interesting, transformed both nature and the cave nest idea into the roofscape. We create a big canopy, you can see. Local weather is so beautiful. This is a highland. It's never too hot in summer, never cold in winter. So most people stay outdoor. So this is a perfect climate, actually generate the people's lifestyle, locals' life. So you can see big roof, but this roof somehow to generate both way. First of all, providing the shading summer, protect from the rain for the people can stay here. Secondly, they have the huge the tension between the lower the ground and the sky. So even people can unconsciously walk from here to the roof. Just make landscape and architecture somehow to really integrate even the performance, this indoor space with open skylight, big skylight. That's not the traditional space the theater is supposed to do. But we want to give some, some experimental. Sometimes if no performance inside can be very interesting. You're going to look at the sky, mountain, the cloud, etc. So this model showing the two volume, right? One is attached to the landscape, ground level. One is pop out, more like a mountain. So those kind of the idea just try to create a lot of the interesting the tension between the building. This is a normal theater, right? If we don't have the rest of the space, that's the perfect for the performance. Definitely we're providing another possibility. And then the stage, the recent stage located this side, we also can share, turn to another way. Definitely you can separate. This is exactly what we really want to achieve. So this is like what I point out, bring the performance to the outdoor, to the Kung space. This space exactly the translate the meaning, right? I just mentioned the Tao, and the actually is really meaningful. We further studied the material, the architecture form generated by nature, kind of really contemporary, but the material we go kind of a local. Even like this wall, we use the Ramder's wall and also wood. We encourage building its transparency. We also made some bird house. The people easy from here take elevator, get on the roof. Also can walking down through the amphitheater here. Even bird can be concentrated this building. So look at it. This is a real photo. Then this is not real. They're supposed to be real. This is the really It's really hard to see. It's a so beautiful mountain. So it became to my Eden. This is pretty much deal with nature. Next one, I also invited by the Chinese artist Cai Guoqiang. His work is inspired by the gunpowder is one of the great invention from Asian China. He just blew the gunpowder on the wall, became to the painting sometimes on ceiling, sometimes on floor. This like Pudong, he made the sky, whole landscape, just like maybe just a few seconds and then disappear. He also made interesting the work in New York. This is both his studio and the private house located center of the Beijing is very close to the Forbidden City. This is a Hutong. Maybe most people have this experience. I won't talk much. Our idea is how we can introduce new to dialogue with old. We also make huge effort to preserve. I use preserve means I'm not trying to interpret anything. The old is old, so we just keep that. And then that's the new. The two courtyard played a really significant role. This is a Kong space, courtyard space, but a lot of activity is going to be start from there. Three building, I gave it 3 characters, 3 themes. This is more the futurism idea is kind of a minimum for the studio. Second room is inspired from painting, just a 2-dimensional. You can see the next slide. And then third room have more 3-dimensional like layer. So this is the kind of important the thinking behind. This is once was the first of all, we really respect existing structure, even we tear down this piece, because this is during the earthquake, Beijing earthquake in 1975. Even I was a little, not little, but it's in middle school, I remember. Lot of the courtyard house falling apart, cracked, and then people build temporary. So we really respect this to keep this symbol form. In other way, this container box also translate from the courtyard house. If you think about typical Chinese courtyard house, they normally use 3 bay to create 1 room, and then they play the room to making courtyard, and then they're going to make a very complicated configuration to fit different side, different situation. So if we ignore the pitch roof, that's suppose this room. So we believe this is a fundamental typology. The material here is like what I said, is attitude, but we not go back to the tradition. We both tradition and the vernacular. We not use the brick and the local material. Here we use the more reflecting to dialogue with old building. You have reflection, the sky, landscape. That's exactly not the way we're talking about the Kong's concept, attitude. To building start to fit this environment, and then it's getting disappear. And at least you not feel this space getting too much pressure. And then the front, the lower can be sliding. Actually, it's, the few door can make transparency to deal with Beijing really worse the climate, pollution, etc. This is the second room I mentioned, actually just the black white. You can get a sense. This is a third room. You can get experience when you walk into the Chinese courtyard house, the hutong first, and then little gate, and then you turn to linear room, and then you go to the courtyard, and then you go to the room, courtyard again, room, courtyard. So this overall, the sequence is important for the people's experience. Even those columns, we not repaint, we not replaced by the new column. This is a construction side. We use the very traditional Chinese way. We never take off this we only cut this piece out, like surgery. That's the really traditional way. You can see actually, I don't know, the slide clear. This is a way, cut the piece of the column out, things the column already declined. This layer we add, we bring the natural light in. We also can reading the texture. This is used to be courtyard wall. This is the room wall. We getting another space from give it a skylight. So just keep the memory also transition. You can see the brick size, brick colors that represent the difference, the period in Chinese history from Qing Dynasty, Republic until today. The concrete also give a little bit the scale, so the light you can reflecting. So this is a courtyard. This I won't see much. This is when Cai Guoqiang and I first to work in his courtyard situation like this, it's really hard to stay. The wall almost falling down, but we made the renovation. So just the image showing from the room to see the courtyard. Most of the dinner for the summer, especially for the Olympic time, things the Cai Guoqiang is one of the curator for the opening ceremony. The Zhang Yimou, we have a lot of artists that always eat here. So that's the basically two projects I'm trying to. First one is nature inspired. Second one is more deal of the tradition. But both projects strongly statement want to make contemporary, but still transform some historical thinking. Why nature is so important for the Chinese? The Chinese culture strongly believe nature is first thing, create everything, including human being, the lifestyle, the country, ideology, religion, including the architecture. Quick show this map. I just try to, even why China became so big, why Chinese civilization start from here. So actually everything generated by the climate, by the weather. This is a two river, right? This is a Yellow River. The Chinese civilization start this region. And then this kind of, if we go back to the more like the 500 years old, that's the central reason people pretty much stay here is kind of a huge plain surrounding by the mountain. You take advantage from both river. Third land is Great Wall, but most people consider Great Wall is the defense, the purpose. Also boundary of the country, actually not really. And if you know the climate in China, this is exactly the south warm air flow to meet the cold weather flow from Siberia. So this is boundary also. If you continue, some people draw the line, this south is going to be perfect for the people's living. So that's also, we got another chance, actually. Even the Great Wall is not, people want to do it. Actually, this is nature. The country, which, if you go back to the, Xia, right? Even Xia, Shangzhou, that's very early, like 3,000, almost 3,000 years ago. So this region is more than 100 trips. So people want to control. For example, like summer, you're going to flow, lower people, hey, come on, you take responsibility, help me to do it. But nobody really do it. And then that's caused the reason that China is going to be the big country. Even the weather very different. The culture very different. Nation, 50 nation, more than 50 nation. That's everything actually caused, most of it caused by climate. Even the architecture, if we go back to the primitive, the typology, like this cave, the north of the Great Wall. Even Xinjiang, you're going to see a lot of walls, right? The Chinese know. Most building is underground. So this is just inside Great Wall. That's showing people take advantage from the cave, and then they built some other part. is somehow to balance the people. Actually, this is called Chinese meaning. Actually, this is called Kong Temple. It's very interesting with our topic. This is go back to the Beijing dynasty. Courtyard house inside of just south of the Great Wall, which is Beijing. It's kind of cold in winter, hot summer. So look at this proportion. The courtyard, almost 50% compared to the room. So that's very interesting ratio. This is also caused by weather. You can imagine, right? So if this courtyard too big, the winter wind is going to be sweep out. The people cannot stay courtyard. If you make it too small, and then the front building going to block the winter sun, you cannot let sun go inside this room. So that's also nature. The generate. It's not just based on a Chinese hierarchy, cultural, not only, but more fundamental. If you go further south, courtyard getting smaller, the hot weather. So that's a very basic question, but actually architects always to forget those things. Not the things we always, Chinese architects have to always facing the challenge about tradition, right? Like 5,000 year civilization, and then you have to facing the tradition. But what is the meaning of the tradition? Most people only pay attention about heritage or physical style, material, etc. But actually, Chinese tradition, they have another strong tradition, which is more spiritual. Some people saying Chinese culture is culture of art. I strongly believe this is really true. Things, even as small, my parents have to force me practice calligraphy, painting, etc. Like Confucian, he talking about the Chinese life circle. He said start from the poetry, and then ethics, successful in the music. From the begin and end of people's life is art. So this, I believe, this is a kind of a tradition. We also can see this painting. Okay, this painting, most part is empathy. I'm not sure, maybe I think that Wang Shu gave the lecture. He talking about more somehow difference, right? But I just give your sense. I'm not trying to translate the painting into the architecture. Painting is painting, never became to the architecture. So I'm not trying to analyze this painting. I just give you the way why Chinese painting like this. Actually, just from their heart, from their culture, art culture. For example, most part is empathy, the Kong, right? But the Kong is give you a lot of things behind. You can, this painting done by Gao Kegong go back to Yuan dynasty. It's very well-known Chinese painter. Actually, he's not a painter. He also the poet. He also, built his farmer house, fishing, whatever. So no professional, no artist in Chinese. So most part is Kong, but the painting, when Chinese artists, they finish his painting, is not finished. He rely on the people to watch this painting. People are going to imagine, okay, that's little things, what is behind. And also the overall process is so abstract. You're really hard to see, okay, he drew Yellow Mountain or Tai Mountain. You never, even for the Chinese, you never can tell, even for him. The Chinese artists, they never go out, sit down in front of a mountain to sketch them. But they would like to traveling in and out. And then they go back Rome. They try to recapture the memory. They recapture the mood and the experience, and then they put it together. They take care the ink consider gold, right? The reckon the blank is inked. That's Chinese. They want minimum. That's exactly like the Kong's the philosophy. They use very easy way, minimum to represent more meaning, to give the painting its life. my painting never finished. So that's their the thinking. Even from Yuan Dynasty, go to the Shitao, the end of Ming Dynasty, early of Qing Dynasty, right? So this is a go back to the Song Dynasty, even the sketch. This time is close to the medieval and early of the Renaissance in Europe. It's kind of a splash ink. It's more people like this, right? But he, kind of spiritual. Look at these three fish. That's influenced my Nazi design. The three fish, if you continue to watch this drawing, you feel the fish really start moving, but actually center is nothing, blank. I try to use the both, the Chinese art, Chinese cultural. I just try to point out Chinese architecture can be contemporary. Maybe vernacular is only the one of the way to discover the Chinese architecture, but I just feel Chinese architects too much concern. Why, this afternoon I spent a lot of time in the Carpenter building and, the Raison Pianos building. I just feel architects supposed to, should be really relaxed, should be really easy. But we're so nervous, many generation Chinese architects, just so nervous try to create some big things. Actually, just really danger trip, end up tradition, the solution. So another one is Contemporary Art Museum. Go back Dali again. The performance is here, and then Dali Museum here. I want to save time. Okay, that's the side adjacent to the historical heritage, the Ming Dynasty pagoda with a little temple. This is our side. So situation, the side. Okay, the idea is here is similar. Kind of a Kong's attitudes to we try to hide this building, concealing this building, definitely generate this building. This image, most people realize this is a Japanese garden, but it actually starts from the Han Dynasty of China. Until Qing Dynasty, even Summer Palace, Beijing, they still use this idea to represent their philosophy. The Chinese, they consider whole universe just the water with three islands, Fangzhang, Yingzhou, Penglai. It's like ideal, definitely this mentally spiritual imagination. And then the Zen garden, the star from the Han Dynasty, they create a really interesting abstract like this. Sands became to the water, and then few rock represent war. Not only this is the people's, actually this is war, actually this is the war. They emphasize, they use three, the small rock, to give the whole meaning of the garden. That's their transformation. I think this garden is so spiritual, so abstract, so contemporary. Even Summer Palace, right? I can go back. Summer Palace, you also feel this way. This is almost like Qing Dynasty, right? The Qing Dynasty imperial Chinese garden. They still use this idea. That's my sketch. This is a really bad, stupid sketch. But basically, I just try to, sometimes I just feel computer cannot really. So I'm not the computer guy, but I just feel very difficult for me to, if I use the computer to waiting for my assistants to translate my ideas, that's going to be really hard. So most of the beginning of or design is start like this. I draw a lot of sketch like this, really minimum. So that's actually transformed from this image, right? So that's showing most of it, but this is not important. Actually, underneath is important. So they created kind of a landscape, the poetic. It's more Chinese thinking in terms of abstract way. And then this sketch getting clear, right? That's the museum, maybe the vertical gallery, for example. And then most of the museum is underneath this ocean. So you can see that's the. This is also I'm talking about three fish, right? So the three things surrounding here. This is the old temple pagoda from Tang Dynasty. This is our museum. So we try to generate together. We leave the big open space in between. We keep the existing path. Basically, this part we not try to do anything. I just try to bring the people from the roof. They can go to this level, and then from this level they can go down. Also, based on this set plan, you can get a sense about the scale. Is very close, the courtyard. So this is a totally another way to looking for the relation, looking for the transformation from the each sunshine I mentioned before, right? The ground level, I won't show too much, but only interesting thing, I created new experience, like public people go through the art storage. This is a small museum, the temporary and then permanent, above the landscape. We have the observation on the top. So this is a beautiful view. You can looking down the ocean, Old Town, looking back just the 4,000 meters tall mountain, Changshan, a stone mountain. So this section. So this is definitely right now it's getting. We just finished the initial concept, final concept. We recently just done. This getting a little bit much smaller, material getting more specific. So the whole process, you can see how we translate some idea into the Pacific design. Even those galleries still intimate in terms of the scale. Also try to break up some the normal gallery idea. This is double level. People can looking up. You also can looking down. You also has the chance to look through the skylight, the clear sky, to see the cloud, mountain, etc. Have a strong dialogue with the nature. The courtyard, once again, many courtyard. This one, another one, to bring the light, bring the activity, to use cones. This idea, you can generate a lot of activity actually in this blank space. Vertical, top have the observation, typical, those kind of the museum. I'm not further to talk about the technical part of the museum. The museum has the lot of knowledge, what is a future museum. A similar project we just finished in last month, just a very preliminary conceptual for the create a Whiteland Museum in Shandong province. This is our side. I would like to create the museum more like experience installation rather than real museum. Currently, a lot of museum is just like classroom, right? You're reading so many science things, but I would like to create some experience. This section is where we start from. Very interesting. So you know about the wetland, but you never know what is underneath. This is our section. We start from here. Similar, the art museum in Dali, we also carefully studied the landscape. We push most of the space underneath the ground. This is my first sketch showing the pop out, how we created layer, the people going to mystery, like you walk through the white land, and then you also can go down. That's initial sketch. And then we start to cover on the roof. This is we generate transformed like this. Also like what I said, each sunshine, the kind of a thinking. Those space became definitely really important underneath, but the people only can see the little rock or mountain. We call this little hill, right? And then people going to be unconscious walk in and out this little museum. We try to create a really small scale in terms of building high. It's not based on the museum like this. really give the attention, give the white land the experience. So that section showing how we make this work, interior. Yeah, this is a really initial preliminary. Yeah. So most of the project, I only showed the first part, how I translate some inspiration, some idea into the conceptual level. But one project going to prove we can make high quality of architecture as well. So this is the section, right? That's like the diagram, first diagram I show you guys. It's more like a white land. Underneath is another wall. To this experience, almost not like educate, not like school and typical museum things, no collection here. We're just providing the people hand-on, the shading, etc. Next one is going to really contrast with this small museum. That's in the Tibet, the most highland in the world, right? I always consider where's the far away from my mind, actually, is Tibet. I don't know, even he's short. If I from Beijing fly to Tibet, I only like 4 hours, last 4 hours, even shorter than Los Angeles flight here. But I still consider this is really far from my myself. That's maybe the so unique. This nature is so unique. Religion is so special. That's the most of the highland, right? Even the Tibet, the Lhasa, the ground is 4,000 meters tall. The Dali's mountain's peak is 4,000. The Beijing is only a few, I don't know, couple of hundred for the most mountain. Look at this, the texture or fabric. I'm not interested in, those roads, but actually I just make a comparison. This surrounding is new development, maybe start from the after 1949. Last 50 years, they start to build something very differently compared to the old town. Old town, if you go there, you feel this is rooted into the local climate and the people's, the religion. Very solid, enclosed, since Tibet is very cold, heavy wind. In winter, but summer they need the sun, and then the building is not like Chinese building, pitch roof. That's cast by nature. This most building like, I don't know, this is where it's come from, like Shenzhen, Beijing, or Shanghai. Most people, actually, we really care about how it looks like. They just keep trying the identity. Okay, this is Tibet. And then they give the red color, give the roof cap, whatever. But actually, doesn't belong to this place. We always fall in this trap. That's the Chinese architects always have to answer this question. So I really care about this part, why they come out like this. I strongly believe definitely cultural and the weather. So we catch up the soul, the small alley, small courtyard, very inner, the central, the material, and then that became to our design. This is our side. It's not too far from the Potala Palace. This is like somehow built, infused by after 1949. It's a lot of generic building. It's really hard to see like those kind of building. But this peaceful land, nobody really talk. We talk. So I start to, the sketch is really far away from our design, but they showed my experience. I try to catch up the sense of primitive, the experience in Tibet. I just feel this place really like original human beings from, kind of a nature dominated people so, culture so primitive. So this is kind of a rough, never have any decoration like Chinese, the center area and the beautiful curving roof. Never happened here Even they have a lot of water rain, but they want to song, so they have to make a terrace. So this is we start to transform the primitive, the typology into our building, many courtyard, just a different scale. The front part is more cultural museum. The center part is like lecture meeting room, and then surrounding lot of the more like hotel room. We also the consider local the Tibet medicine. They consider the people or whole world formed by the earth, the water, air, fire, intangible, and then we transfer into the more Pacific the courtyard to give the sense about that idea. This is the first courtyard, more like their courtyard, just getting a little bit bigger scale. So car and people can walk in, turn around, and then walk into the reception lobby, public cafe. We also have, if you have been to Lhasa, doesn't matter, it's their palace or their local small courtyard room. They're always create a lot of the stair like this. The angle like, I don't know, like 70 degree. Like you climb a mountain. I don't think this is because they don't know, make a stair like this. They feel comfortable. I think that's the religion. That's in their mind. They have some religion talking about sky leather, right? Talking about one of their philosophy is, people from sky, and then you're going to be make good for the people, and then you go back. You have the ladder to connect heaven and the earth. So lot of stair. When I climbing up, really like climbing up. Just I have to, local people they can do, but so I create a lot of, sense like this. I change a little bit. Most you saw this table is very heavy table. So this is not the far away you see the Putala Palace. It's kind of rough, the character. We concrete structures, that's for sure. Some metal to making some things we have a little bit can deliver for the material, they cannot stay. We have to rely on the metal, concrete. But the building typology for sure is the local. But building material kind of local. But overall configuration you also feel very contemporary way, like those detail glass, kind of a minimum wood, where even the wood is no more detail, just like local they did, like those kind of primitive and rough. Many different courtyard to relate each other, from the alley to the courtyard, from the you also can dialogue from the terrace. This is a local building supposed to have to catch up the sun, and then small alley providing the shading the summer. So yeah. Next one is go back to that's 2005 actually. That's my studio first project. It's not a brand new project. This is like a renovation into the one existing structure into the hotel. Maybe that's only few the commercial building I have done this one, but I still translate this hotel into the interesting concept. This location when we say very important existing structure, abandoned like 2 or 3 years, nobody really care. I call this is an urban tumor. We need to make surgery. This is from the Forbidden City courtyard house. The first idea is transform the local courtyard scale, the configuration in the vertical. That's also Kong's idea. Enforce this building style to dialogue with surrounding. They're getting not solid block anymore. They're getting more transparency. I was shocked when I go to the construction site, whole building, just really, you really feel very, tough. Things I cut this whole box, like I don't know how many courtyard. I just carve out so many courtyard. But the beautiful experience doesn't matter which room you go. You must go to their major Kong courtyard and then go to each room have your own courtyard or share with somebody else. The material or the building is very abstract, very minimum way. It's contemporary, but is minimum in terms of the architecture form. This is a material we develop, work with, manufacture. But the reality is very difficult. Things the manufacturer was kicked out during the bidding the time, and then the new contractor they don't know, and then the previous the manufacturer we work with half years, they not willing to give them the secretary about how to make this translucent material. So and then we have to rely on those. But the main concept still remain. The big courtyard is the big idea. So that's this image has been published in the New York Times. They one article talking about how maybe like today what I'm talk, the contemporary inspired by the tradition, the neighborhood. Since this project, I start to think about what I'm thinking about the contemporary way, how we transform the traditional like courtyard building or use the empty space like a Kong, nothing, bring everything in to give the architecture more life, more respect like Chinese painting did. We develop. We also work on like artist. So I designed the lighting, like sky. Hopefully they have the star right now. At least maybe 2005 is okay. So we bring the star from the sky into or major courtyard, small courtyard, etc. This idea was developed into the. We just start construction recently. The one cultural center in the boundary of the Beijing, the west side, the bottom of the mountain. This region used to be a big steel factory. Shogang is a really generic city, so nothing interesting, except that they have the beautiful background, the mountain. This always, once again, I show this again. So the projects, the FA are very high, no open space on the ground level, except the future they're going to convert the train track going to the future park. Right now, still not allow people to go. So our building is really FAR program so complicated. The cultural center were typical in China. If you're talking about the idea of the cultural center in China, must have museum, have the concert or theater, have the library, have the bookstore, have the access. For example, this is very typical they are thinking. So all the program have to meet. When we put together those programs, you feel really hard to give this the architecture some revolutionary the thinking. So they're going to turn to very efficient the box. And then I start to, okay, you like the mountain, right? That's your background. Also, we learn this, we experience people. Actually, this is very tall. From the bottom to here, like, I believe like 30, 40 meters. So that's the people's experience. It's really interesting, people climbing in the middle of the mountain, in the cliff. So I recreate this kind of thing. This cone space, once again, start to show the natural stone and then transform into our building. So this is the kind of a more the close what we want. For example, really minimum in terms of the materiality. Just use the U-shaped glass, and then only create this cut, which is we call the empty space. But because this space, they generate all the program. For example, when I make presentation for them, they like, but they always think about image. They say, okay, that mountain, okay, that's great, nature, that's great. But when they take further consideration, they said, "Hey, probably have the problem. If I enclose the glass, that's the area. You create really stupid space. Maybe we invest money without any return." But I explained to them, because this space, actually, whole program became the life. That's exactly Kong's idea. So, for example, if you have the concert here, just you generate your concert hall, your theater to outdoor. If you play the movie, that's your movie. That's nighttime showing the people. If you have some exhibition here, that's the museum part. So they never waste, and also they can providing interesting the possibility to like all the people. Doesn't matter where you go, which program you plan to go. You have the chance to brace, to meet people, to communicate. I think this is perfectly, make a statement to the public. Here is cultural place. Please come. We have the movie, we have the sculpture, we have the exhibition, like urban stage, etc. After I explain this, finally they definitely accept this design. So we continue to develop, this design. That's maybe more like a performance scenario. We also create a chimney to bring the hot air from inside, also providing the light for here and there. So that can be really interesting. Like once again, that's Kong became to the significant role to stimulate this architecture into the more life. We found, I just really quick, so this idea, like a cave idea, continue to apply to the design we work on right now. Is really preliminary, conceptual level, and more like first of all, you can see this dorm, the student dorm. They left the ground level, and then they give the public transparencies like back, and all the landscape can flow into the inside the courtyard. Secondly, we gave the building some the outdoor space to continue to reinforce the activity. And then finally, we enclosed this building again. The big courtyard gave you a sort of the sense. So for example, the future dorm is maybe the lecture, amphitheater, the music, even lower deck, for example. The future dorm can be changed, right? Maybe the library in the campus future, or maybe no classroom. I don't know. I just, based on this, and then we continue to create those things. So big courtyard, for example. Definitely right now, the facade we totally changed. The more minimum, this is so too generic, and so right now I like a current facade. Maybe very quick, I'm going to jump in the continue. Okay, the courtyard. I was invited by Guggenheim Foundation, tried to make a Guggenheim Museum here. So the detail I won't say, but the concept exactly same with Cai Guoqiang's idea. We try to make our building in another way to dialogue historical building. It's not just, okay, here I do nothing, I have to totally make underground, or I have to use the exactly same form, same material to do that. So here we are going to try to really make a dialogue. I'm not trying to repeat the things you already know, the Cai Guoqiang, exactly the same, the typology, material, dialogue, and then building tend to disappear. So invisible museum is overall concept. That's another way. Definitely this building is temporary, no foundation. This is really light, like a container, they can move in even. So this idea, but we never realized. And then Guggenheim, the people like Tom Cruise, the former the director of Guggenheim, he resigned from his position, but we continue to try this one right now. But fortunately, this one we start, make a renovation first step. This is even bigger than this is the imperial temple for the start from Ming Dynasty. Very interesting idea. Maybe through this model you can see we have two steps. The one is preserve those buildings to make really minimum way to transform the interior space in the contemporary, the museums, art museum space. The second phase, we also use the idea same Guggenheim Museum Beijing is a kind of a temporary. This structure is the biggest, the wood structure. I don't know if in the world, for sure in China, this bigger than the Taihe Temple in Forbidden City. The very sensitivity about Chinese cultural things. This is his father, right? This is an emperor. So they make bigger, wider, horizontal, but lower. But he taller, but smaller. So this is very interesting. I don't know how they transform those silk wood from Nepal into here. It's really original. But most of Forbidden City, and at least the Taihe Temple, they fire down two times during the Qing Dynasty. And then we convert different temple in the different use, but everything is temporary. Just a curtain can be disappear like this. Thus, we also cooperate with Anselm Giefer, some artists, working together to try how we can, translate this historical building into the contemporary. This is a construction, and then this one is done. Currently, we finished maybe 90% of the temple is going to be, first phase going to be open to public during this May. The Minsheng, the art museum, I have made a lot of renovation to into the museum. First one is Pace Museum. We finished a few years, maybe like 2009, 2010, and then this is a current museum. Right now, I just signed a contract to go, right after I go back, going to work on this the art center for the 791. So 3 buildings maybe can be dialogue. So I'm not trying to talk much, just to focus on the point, which is industry building, we carve out big courtyard space. They used to be cover everything. And then we create one spa, not spa, which is interesting vertical, the flexible space like this. And then we also try to develop some material. This is what we really try to do to make some public engagement. Stair became to the theater seating, for example. Really straightforward, very typical. The museum, perfect. But after you go almost like a 150 long gallery, you feel boring, and then end up create some interesting space to give the commission for the artists, like even IVV, they can make the craziest thing. The central courtyard, they can be like a performance, the concert, but right now you also like Richard Sears sculpture can be fit in the moving trial to providing the possibility hang-on artwork. This is lecture hall, can be open the door. This became to the outdoor stage. And even inside this black box, we facing the difficulty, the industrial building, no budget to do any interior about acoustic. So I proposed some the painting with fabric. When you slide, the small percentage with the fabric curtain, acoustic going to be changed. If you fall, that's, in order to, that's flexible thinking, I think similar with what I'm talking about point in the beginning. This is the museum people. This is artist Anselm Giefer, his consultant from exhibition. We're working together during the work on the museum construction side. We discussed the detail. The construction began, and then this is right now we almost finished the most tough part is a big amphitheater I mentioned too. This is a precasting concrete. It's turned to. I feel very good, and at least at this moment I feel kind of optimistic about this quality, the skylight. Definitely, our budget was cut dramatically because the controversy of their leadership. And then this building on hold like almost 2 years, and then we have no budget. But I just use really temporary material. This material no people use exterior for the exterior. This is like paper. The aluminum material used to be for the after fourth layer, like a stone wall behind. You use the water insulation. They almost cover this. So if you try to, for example, if you try to push yourself, you're going to permanent have the memory here. So that's the material we own. But we really want to achieve this surreal. This photo took by the one artist, the critique people. He was moved by this moment. He feels that's so surreal. Right before I come to the USA, he just asked me to meet him to try to translate this penny tray into his work. Very interesting thought, the surreal. He said, okay, this is paid, that's you, that's your building. That's my work. So, okay, I said it's okay. So maybe it pays. I just running through. This is really, the building I really like, since so minimum way, so flexible, existing structure, almost there. We only making new floors. That's perfect for the museum space. Very naturally done. The quality of the things I only talking about concept level. This is one we can show our capability. Actually, we can do a very good job in terms of construction. I'm talking about more like a conceptual level, but it's not means architects. You don't need to know the construction. But this is not supposed today's topic. Maybe next topic we can talking more about construction. The concept, I think, similar idea once before you saw a lot of project. This is after we realized this building. Very clear, like people, since this region only a couple of 100 meters away from the beach. Another interesting, the setting here is going to be really commercial. I don't know, I forgot the form, USA form. They done the kind of a generic commercial building. It's pretend to the Chinese, the pitch roof, classical. The two building, actually three building. The one building they want to make a design museum. Another one is done by Richard Meyer, like a cultural, they call it cultural club. The cultural have the club, I don't know. But I want to make really experimental and surreal the try, the test. So this is a kind of a really clear, the soft, but this is a photo, this is not a rendering. Okay, once again, I have to emphasize that. This is after built. The interior give you kind of a surreal experience. That's really boundaryless. It's really Kong idea. The one Austria curator, the Peter Noir, he has really interesting. Just based on my design, he created fantastic the show in terms of architecture, industrial car. His car is floating above you like airplane, and then the airplane on the ground more like a car, for example, and then the Cai Guoqiang stuff floating on here. So that's the job site. We went through with the curator. If you look at this quality, this during the construction, that's more realistic. Probably everybody know this is I'm not from Gary. I don't have that money to build aluminum and titanium things. But we have to deal with very difficult the stainless steel. Stainless steel really hard to making the things they too hard, too tough. So we keep the generate or building form in order to we can come out some panel system. No double curving the panel in here. And also maybe I remember, I forgot the 20 or at least less than 30 kind of a panel. We achieved this overall closing form. That's even different a lot of curving form. They just piece by piece here is really enclosed. So that's my first try. I just try to put my idea, first of all, and then construction into the limit to see how far we can go. And then this one, but I'm not the people always to the job site. I only to a few times. But I rely on the construction, the documentation, and the manufacturers cooperation. Things are done so precisely about the construction documentation. And then also we have really good client. This client is really professional. They know what we want, and they doesn't to bother you. They give you time. Also manufacturer, even this manufacturer, I still keep work on the Dali lot of building. The interior, minimum, the construction people start construction, and then curator start to jump into to come out with some idea. This is after we almost finished that interior space. Kind of a surreal, like a James Terrace installation. They totally overturn the traditional museum, the experience. You feel you're somehow in the fog. That's very interesting. That's exactly the like Chinese painting, exactly what I want to create, this kind of a surreal. That's real people. You almost building is not exist here. You have a sort of imagination about the beyond the space. This is really surreal, right? This building almost done, but it's construction people, they live like this container. I just feel this image is so interesting, like these people, very interesting, funny. Definitely, most project, I know the culture, the weather, everything. But this project is my first project I work on outside of China. The Guggenheim, they created some team to invite like Gary, Jean Nouvel, Zaha, Tado Ando, Norman Foster, etc. They created, including this small pavilion, the Greg Lin, etc. So like a young architects. But I don't know if we're still young. Even there, we right now over 50, but compare those guys, maybe at least this guy, we're still young. So this is our side. So this is exhibition. So the concept actually things I know nothing about Abu Dhabi desert, and I have to where I can start. Basically, I just start from the climate. Nature. I have been a lot of Middle East, some medieval town, like they connect together. The valley providing shading, the courtyard small, the roof connect. So that's the idea. So that's create underneath the cone space, providing the people social meeting things for the biennial pavilion. This is, most people, the people not communicate inside of this pavilion. They on the roof, they underneath the shading. So that's definitely this is my 2000 design, but I don't know when we can realize that because the economy problem. So, okay, I almost finished. Just the character I really would like to show. This is a Venice installation 2010. I inspired by actually this is Chinese, the poetry, especially last two sentences is heavy river in the waves, bao thousands bamboo. So this is very interesting, the Chinese poetry. Things I'm struggling, how we can make the installation in such industrial environment and also in Venice, things I don't know that place. So maybe this is very interesting. I try to transform. I just feel that actually the poet make the poetry is kind of similar with Chinese, like architects making their architecture is not a painter make. So that's I use ink try to catch up this formless, kind of a natural bamboo, the configuration. Definitely we also try to make this installation really light like fog. So this is a construction, very easy way, just a little pole push on the grass and then we cover the stone. That's the installation. But through this, you can see this, the river weaving, right? And then you see this is a kind of a bamboo, formless, no form, but kind of a really open. You feel nothing, and then you feel very interesting. People like to walk in. We also keep the dimension about each two rod. If you try to walk in, you have to push. And then it's like a bamboo. They also create an interesting sound like bamboo. The night, they have the interesting light to reflecting like people's breath. We control the light, like light and down, and then, So all of those inspiration by nature. Definitely tradition too, right? So this is from the installation. And then this installation, once again, I made another interpretation to represent the Chinese artist. I think this is like a Chinese artist exhibition in Basel, in Germany. So that's much bigger and then more efficient. This is done very quickly. That's the architecture installation product. This is I work with the Schwarzsky. They want to create some based on the theme. They have to use their standard crystal the product to make a creation. So I inspired here, but I'm not using exactly Pacific shape. I cutting the very rectangular shape and then use it. Even though I feel that's not enough, we have to transform again to making this glass. That's the real product. They are like a water drop, right? And then you feel the lotus play, maybe not. This is like water, you have the bubble. So all those things start to give people more imagination. I think the good architects until people to experience. The people help you to finish the perfect work. So definitely it's even smaller. This is, I just tell you the story that happened last. This summer I was invited by the jewelry company. They produced a lot of jewelry from the Brazil color, the very expensive the stone. But they asked me to come out with some idea. I go to their pick up the really valuable stone. I just from the level 2 push on down. I keep twice and then I pick up the size. Very interesting. This represent my idea, which is I want to use. What is this stone want to be? They have their molecular structure. They're going to. They have their fundamental things. Why they shape always? I was surprised when I pick up this shape very closed. Think they have structure, and then they slide. If you without polished, that's very naturally interesting way. So I want to go back. I want to show this really primitive. Definitely, when I speak about my idea for the audience, not the press, definitely our clients really nervous since I said, okay, actually current the jewelry designer basically ruling those stones. So they want treating this personally. They feel this, I need cutting, and then that's not natural enough. So also we catch up the gravity is stone. Even this, I'm used the horsetail. I don't know if our client confident or like, but that's maybe my last try. Maybe end of this, they never invited me to doing jury anymore, probably. So that's maybe my last slide. The thinking never stopped. This is I'm on the way from Los Angeles to Boston. I made a sketch for another cultural center in Anhui. I keep playing the cone and the co-chair idea. That's going to be internally reflecting the idea what I really want to describe. That's for my next journey. Through the project above, actually, I'm not trying to make a conclusion. I just feel the future of Chinese architecture is not a simple interpretation of the traditional Chinese architecture. It's not a form, it's not style, not a materiality, not a physical thing. Actually, we feel we have to find out more fundamental or basic the architecture things, like why is architecture like this? Why nature created everything? Why tradition? What's the real tradition means? That's maybe what I really want to talk, explain my idea. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. A little bit longer, right?
You promised to be shorter. That's good. Okay. So maybe there are a few questions. I know
okay.
we have gone through our question time, but yes, we have Neil.
Yeah, thanks for a fantastic lecture.
Oh, Neil.
Very
okay. See you again. Right.
Very inspirational. But I guess that there are probably two ways of thinking about how we can learn from nature. Your way, which is very much about symbolism, about representation, the forms of nature and so on. And there's another tradition, which is about understanding the process of nature. Especially this week, because this is kind of Fry Otto week, right? I mean, he both died and also was awarded the Pritzker Prize. And he was someone who had a different approach towards nature, something that was continued here by Akim Menges and a few others, about how we can kind of learn from the processes of nature, not the forms, but the processes, and transfer that into architecture. Is that something you'd ever entertain as a way of thinking, or you very much locked into the kind of symbolic way of engaging with nature?
And maybe not totally get what's your point. But I try to. I just believe the architecture is art. Things you can have so many the way to approach them. Maybe Wang Shu is one way. It's based on more the traditional, the material, or the way traditional thinking interpret into the contemporary way. But I feel we still have another way, which is I just feel this way more close to the both end, really primitive, go back to the early Chinese civilization, and then go beyond the future. So I just feel I'm really interesting. I just feel this both way actually easy to connect. So that's my maybe if I answer your question.
No, I guess I was thinking in terms of kind of questions of performance. So sustainability in particular, how can nature inform us about how to approach sustainability, structural performance, and so on and so on? Does that make sense?
Neil, just to simplify.
Okay, sorry.
Not to make it more complex, but I think if he was being critical, he would say that you're working more towards the image of nature. So when you look at a landscape, you try to make a building that in some ways is an abstraction of that landscape. So your work is somehow both an abstraction, but it's also figurative. No? And when some people think about nature, they try to follow processes of nature. So it's more like the idea, not the image of the tree, but the way that the tree grows. I got it.
Okay, so that's really heavy and a good question. I have motivated to answer. I think actually today maybe the kind of hard to explain further because I'm architect, I'm not the theoretical people. I'm not trying to bring too many actually that cone idea. I feel sort of answer your question. Primitive, the sustainable. Actually, sustainable have so many things, right? If I try to answer the fundamental of sustainability, I just feel we not rely on the modern technology. That's my pursuit. That's my goal. The things, for example, when we making the building, for example, like Beijing, maybe courtyard, that's more naturally. I feel many generations, they discover both nature and the architects to find out, okay, the people use, right? That's not only rely on the people I want, actually this is a nature one. So I really feel that's the clue. Or we, if, for example, like Lhasa or the Blur Hotel, most people, the building I'm not rediscover the beginning. I also borrow the courtyard house. Why it's like that? So it must be really fundamental in terms of sustainability. It's not a process of the modern technology. So I think maybe today, things I use many in conceptual way to try to clear about the transform the idea. Maybe too much form, but actually not fundamental like what I'm talking about, the Kong's idea, the modest idea, based on the contemporary. That's the whole process.
Okay. I was interested in this idea of, you showed it in a number of ways, translating from sources of inspiration into architecture. And you used two major kinds of sources. One was nature and the other one was tradition. And it seems to me that these two things, nature and tradition, are the complete opposite of each other, where nature or tradition and culture are what nature is not. And it seems, though, that you want to take traditions, and you made this case in a number of points, take tradition and root it in nature, so that the Great Wall of China is actually formed from a natural climate boundary, or the courtyard housing is actually based on a certain climate. So I'm wondering, do you think of nature and tradition as separate or the same? And then why is it important that tradition should be rooted in nature?
So why the topic I'm talking about the inspiration from nature and the tradition. But for the Chinese culture, this is the same. Like what I said, in the beginning, early philosophy, they consider nature is the most important thing. And then the different the civilization continue to carry on. So that's became the tradition. For example, if we parallel to compare the painting, right? So the Renaissance, the Ming Dynasty, the Renaissance in Europe, they pretty much, the topic is religion and people, right? So they want to more specific. They sketch you, and then they try to exactly to catch up to the most of the specific about your soul, your body, everything. But Chinese painting, Chinese art or like painting, they never do this. They not doing too much people. They do the nature, right? So you saw the Shanshui represent the Chinese, the thinking. So actually, nature is strong, important part of the Chinese tradition. That's my understanding.
But if I could just add one more thing. If it's part of tradition to think about nature, doesn't that make nature very unnatural or cultural? I mean, there's a cultural image of nature which is strongly rooted to a tradition, not necessarily nature as nature, but nature as culture, let's say.
I'm trying to use tradition and nature, like Chinese tradition and nature, to explain, where's the inspiration come from. Hold on, maybe can you translate? No. I totally, like a Kong today, right? My mind too blank right now. I forgot. I talk too much Kong, and
That's what happens.
sorry. Yeah. So, okay. Since you're pointing out, like you mentioned the Great Wall, but the Great Wall is not to represent the Chinese tradition. I don't think that's Chinese tradition. I just try to use more spiritual the thinking to. I feel only the spiritual things can be work with contemporary Chinese architecture. Traditional maybe doesn't work. Maybe they work certain time, but that's maybe.
One of the, I'm going to speak Chinese now. No,
Sure.
one of the,
Hopefully you're not Kong, right?
one of the things about this concept of emptiness, or what you basically now refer to the artificiality of nature because of the way in which it's incorporated into work, then it's no longer the idea of the naturality of nature itself. So in the painting, that painting itself is now a form of representation. It's no longer really nature. It's the depiction, and the depiction of the thing is already involves a certain kind of method of drawing, and which I think also Pei was trying to say that. So on one level, when you follow the image of something, it's true that it's a figurative thing, but actually through the process of abstraction of that idea of the copying, because on one level he's copying the outline of the horizon of the landscape and things like that, but you arrive at another form of abstraction, which then you try to give form to by assigning materiality, by assigning things to it, and through that process of assigning, through that process of assignation, you transcend the idea of the copy, the idea of the imagistic thing, because there's a material now, whether it's the aluminum or the glass or the bamboo that now represents the idea of garden or nature and so on. So there is a form of recovery, if you like, which is distant from the copy, but there is the reference to nature as a form of imitation. But the recovery itself is then creates a distanciation, creates a distance. It's not a perfect response to the question, but the point is that when you start with something, the thing that you end up with is not always the thing that you started with. And so that process of distanciation is an important form of having resonance of the source, but actually ending up somewhere else. And that would be a kind of response to Neil's question. The problem with the procedures of nature is, ironically, you will end up at times mimicking the image of the thing through the following of the process. And so one of the things that, let's say, with Achim, who I completely admire, and I think it's really a very innovative work, then that work finds it very difficult to then actually recover or regain certain specific spatial conditions. It's always limited to the pavilion, at least at this point so far. It can't, in a sense, it's had a hard time escaping the tree as the tree. It always is the image of the tree. So to get from the tree to the room, it's a big jump. And so that's going to be one of the struggles that we have in terms of biomimetic work, and how do you actually introduce a different kind of set of complexities, and how do you assign material differentiation, despite the fact that there are incredible innovations that are in place in the fabrication and making of the thing. So I think this part of a kind of struggle that's going on with those two ideas of the copy of the image and distancing, and the idea of the process, and ultimately maybe the process ironically ends up looking more like the image. So, but I think we've got to send people to bed. Thank you very much for a wonderful thing.
Thank you. You're patient, actually.